Canada's next government takes the reins in just 3 days. Prime Minister-designate Justin Trudeau and his cabinet will be sworn into office at a ceremony in Ottawa on Wednesday, giving Canadians their first look at who's in and who's been left on the back benches. So, what goes into putting together a cabinet and getting a government up and running? Few people in this country can answer that question better than Eddie Goldenberg. He's a former chief of staff and senior policy advisor to former Prime Minister Jean Chrétien and one of the authors of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Eddie Goldenberg joins me from Ottawa. All right, Eddie, let me just open up your brain and pick away at it because this cabinet is coming in very quickly. At this point, have all those who are chosen, have they received a phone call from the Prime Minister-designate?
Oh, presumably they have. You know, it's interesting. Sir John A. Macdonald one time signed a guest book, and under profession, he wrote cabinet maker.
All right, so this cabinet...
It's the biggest job of an incoming Prime Minister, and Mr. Trudeau has a problem. He has an embarrassment of riches, but it's not a bad problem to have for an incoming Prime Minister.
When you do have an embarrassment of riches, you also have many people who will be disappointed. How do you handle that?
Well, that's, you know, the people run to be members of Parliament, and if they're lucky, and if they're chosen to be ministers. But, you know, to choose a cabinet, a Prime Minister has to look at all, an incoming Prime Minister has a number of criteria. He has to balance some with experience. You need a couple of people who have been in cabinet before, who know how cabinet operates, and frankly, who can act as mentors for ministers who've never been there. And you need a lot of fresh faces. You need ethnic diversity. Ethnic diversity, by the way, is extremely important in an age of globalization because ministers who've been born elsewhere are great ambassadors for Canada, whether in China or India or wherever they have been born. They're also role models for their communities in Canada, and they help in the integration of their communities. Obviously, you need gender balance. You need to balance regions. There's a convention in Canada that every province should be represented in cabinet, and that's very important. Then a Prime Minister has
Eddie,
to look at...
you talk about gender balance, but Trudeau has talked about gender equality. Does that tie his hands some? No,
I don't think. I mean, when I say balance, 50-50 is pretty good balance.
Yes, it is. We haven't had that before.
Yeah. You know, I think, frankly, I think it might have tied his hands if he had had a different group of people elected. But he has a terrific cadre of men and women elected from whom he can choose his cabinet. So I don't think 50-50 will be a problem for him.
There have been some critics who say Trudeau is putting gender equality and regional balance, to use your word, ahead of talent and experience. What do you say to that?
Well, we'll see that obviously on Wednesday, but I think he has some very, very talented people and experienced people in all regions of the country. I think that, you know, when you talk about talent and experience, what the Prime Minister really should be looking at is good judgment. People who are collegial, who are problem solvers, who are innovative. And ministers should understand that their best friends are their deputy ministers. They will work very well. They'll be successful if they work well with the public service. I don't think the previous government did work well with the public service. And if Mr. Trudeau can give one instruction to new ministers, it would be your deputy minister is your best friend. He's not your worst enemy.
Mm-hmm. You know,
the other thing I would say is that you know, there are areas where specialized knowledge is important in terms of economic portfolios, finance, industry. He will want to have people who have pretty good knowledge of the economy. In other areas, he may want fresh faces with fresh approaches to problems. The public service will be able to give him their experience and their knowledge of actual individual items in their departments.
You talked about collegiality, Eddie. Does having a smaller cabinet increase the possibility they will all get along, they'll all play together?
Oh, I'm not sure if it's a question of numbers. I think it's not a question of numbers. It's a question of who they are. And you know, one of the things Mr. Trudeau has said is he wants his ministers to be deciders, and the best way to have ministers as deciders is to appoint strong ministers. And I remember one time going to Mr. Chrétien, Prime Minister Chrétien, and so one of the guys in the PMO had a problem with something the Minister of Agriculture was going to do. Mm-hmm. And Mr. Chrétien said to me, he said, Eddie, is that central to the government? I said, no, it's not central to the government. Well, he said, then don't worry about it. The Prime Minister's office should only worry about matters that are central to the government. Final
question for you, Eddie. Are you willing to share any names you think for those big portfolios you mentioned, like foreign affairs, like finance, like defense?
No, I would say that the one person who knows those names is Mr. Trudeau.
And he's not telling.
He's not
which
telling.
is why I'm asking you.
Yeah, we'll know on Wednesday, and he's wise not to tell.
All right. Pleasure to have you on the program, Eddie. You take care.
Thank you very much.
Eddie Goldenberg is a former chief of staff and senior policy advisor to Prime Minister Jean Chrétien. He is in Ottawa.